Thank you, Senator. Senator Graham.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr.
Morning.
Attorney General. People on both sides of the aisle are asking you to do some very worthy things. I mean, this is a great area for you to be involved in. Tell me how sequestration over the next decade affects your ability not only to do more, but do what you're tasked to do today in terms of fighting crime and terrorism.
Were sequestration to remain in place, we'd simply not be able to do the kinds of things that the American people expect of us. We have 4,000 fewer people in the Justice Department now than we did in January of 2011 as a result of sequestration or the expectation of sequestration that forced me to put into place a hiring freeze. And we have fewer investigators, fewer prosecutors. Our ability to do the job is just very negatively impacted by sequestration, or has been negatively impacted by sequestration.
It's one thing to become more efficient. Eventually, it becomes a lack of ability.
Right.
And so I hope we'll all remember that. Over the next decade, do you see threats to our homeland increasing, decreasing, or staying about the same regarding terrorist activity?
That's an interesting question. I would say that in terms of the threat from core al-Qaeda, the threat, I think, is likely to be less severe. I am more concerned about homegrown violent extremists who get radicalized in a variety of ways that you're very familiar with, and what they might try to do, where you have one-offs or two people.
So there are two threats: homegrown terrorism, which I agree is definitely on the rise. The likelihood of being attacked by someone here who has been radicalized as an American citizen, I think, is Boston is maybe the future.
Right.
But you got to remember, the Pakistan Taliban are the ones that trained the guy in New York, so it's just not core Al-Qaeda.
No,
so,
I mean the affiliates. No, you're right. I mean the affiliates are.
They're out to get us, and I just want people to understand that privacy is important, but understanding the threat too is also important. About the IRS, do you agree with me that the allegation is that the IRS agency targeted people who were political enemies of the president, perceived to be political enemies of the president, and made it harder for them to organize and express themselves? Isn't that the basic allegation?
It's certainly what generated my desire to have an investigation done.
I mean, this is not the first time that's happened in Washington. I mean, there's some Nixon.
I'm old enough to remember the Nixon.
Right, and things do happen, but I guess how we handle it's important. Senator Cruz has written you a letter that I please pay good attention to, because Senator Cornyn suggested that the victim, the person trying to organize in Houston, is that where the lady's from, hasn't been talked to. Is that possible?
Well, because the investigation's not completed.
But how could you investigate a matter if you don't talk to the people who are claiming to be the victim of the offense? It'd be almost impossible to say that was a thorough investigation, wouldn't it?
Well, you're certainly going to have to talk to the victims. My only point was the investigation's not over.
Yeah,
so
no,
it's
I understand. But at this point in the investigation, could you don't have to, how many victims of the Tea Party organizations that claim to have been abused by the IRS, how many people have been actually talked to, the victims themselves, by anybody in the Justice Department?
Yeah, this is an ongoing matter, and I'm not necessarily sure I want to get into the specifics of what we have done.
Well, if the answer were none, that would be stunning, wouldn't it, at this late date?
Well, you see, you say late date. The investigation's been going on for some time. I'm not sure how much longer it's going to go, so I'm not sure if we can say
And I don't mean
date.
to belabor this, but do you know if any of the victims have been talked to by the Department of Justice about what they alleged happened to them?
Well, again, I don't want to get into. I've been briefed on this matter on a couple of occasions. I don't want to share the nature.
Well, finally, the idea of a special prosecutor seems to make sense here. The gentleman that you've appointed, I'm sure he's a fine man. He made a donation to the president, and that bothers some people. I understand why it would. Don't you think we'd be better off just to have somebody clearly disconnected from the politics of President Obama? Certainly not have to be a Republican, but just somebody that can't be seen as maybe having a political allegiance to close this matter either through prosecution or dismissal.
Well, this is.
Do you think the country would be better served if we did that?
I think it's an investigation that's being done by career people who have constitutional rights to engage in political activity. the men and women of the Justice Department have, from time immemorial, put aside whatever their political leanings are and conducted investigations in a way that
I
rely only on the
understand.
facts and the law.
Right, you got political appointees and you got career people, and I respect both. But we've got a country to run here, a democracy, and when a group of people, apparently with great reason, believe that their own government made it difficult for them to organize and express themselves politically, that sort of goes to the heart and soul of the democracy, and it would be better for us all if somebody with an independent viewpoint looked at that.
Yeah, I don't think there's any basis to believe that anybody who is involved in this investigation would conduct themselves in a way that is inappropriate or would be shaded
Well,
by
the
their
person you
political
appointed-
activity.
What did I tell someone in South Carolina? The person investigating abuse of power by the Obama administration against conservative groups was a donor to the president.
I would say that people have constitutional rights. The Hatch Act
No,
allows
I
people-
totally agree that, I'm just saying from a perception problem, for lack of a better word. I mean, you know, to me, it just is a no-brainer. I mean, I'm glad that someone outside the Nixon administration eventually looked at Watergate. And I'm not saying this is Watergate. I'm saying on its face, it's not a good moment. So let's go to Benghazi. Can we expect any prosecutions anytime soon against alleged perpetrators in Benghazi?
Well, we have been working very hard in connection with that investigation. The work we're doing is in a very challenging environment. We have identified people who we believe are responsible for.
Is one of them a Mr. Katala?
I don't want to comment on anybody specifically, but
Well,
we have
let me
identified.
just say that Mr. Katala is commonly identified in the press as one of the planners of the attack, men who participated in the attack in Libya. That's what the press reports are, and I have reason to believe they're right. He has been interviewed by CNN, Times of London, and Reuters. Why can't we grab him if the press can talk to him openly in a hotel in Libya?
I will say that we are determined to hold accountable the people who were responsible for that attack, and we will take and use all measures of the American government in order to effectuate that desire.
A few more questions. Did the FBI interviewed the survivors of the attack in the State Department on the 15th, the 16th, and 17th of September? I've asked for those FBI interviews because I want to know what they said about a potential protest. The deputy director, now retired, of the FBI, said that none of the survivors told the FBI agents in Germany 15, 16, and 17 September there was anything other than terrorist attack. They never mentioned a protest. Would you allow us as members of Congress to have access to those interviews?
I'm not aware of what happened in those interviews. I'm not aware of you say these 3 days of interviews. I'm not conversant with what happened during the course of those interviews.
When did you first get notified about what happened in Benghazi, and did you believe it to be a terrorist attack?
I'd have to think about. I'm not sure when I first heard about the attack. I'm sure it's sometime shortly after. So probably within.
Did the FBI ever brief you after these interviews? Do you remember being briefed by the FBI about what they've learned in Benghazi?
After the attack, or
Yes.
I've
after
been
the
briefed
interviews.
by the FBI on a number of occasions with regard to both the attack and the investigation into the attack.
If the last interview was done on the 17th of September, can you look back in your notes and recall and tell us when's the first time you were informed by the FBI about what they had found about the attack? Is that possible?
I'm not sure I understand when.
Okay, and my time is up, but the point I'm trying to make, when did the Attorney General of the United States, were you made aware of the fact the FBI had interviewed the survivors of the attack? When did they tell you about the interview and about what they found?
I'd have to look at the records on that. I mean, what we tried to do initially was to work with the Libyan government to get the FBI into Libya to look at the crime scene. That was our primary concern, our initial concern, and then from there, interviews were done of people who were in the facility at the time and who survived the
You could
attack.
go back and look and let us know in writing when you were first made aware of the FBI's results. Interview, I'd appreciate it.